and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladia Kiridulwale, the headlines. At least 4 explosions heard in Ukrainian capital Kyiv. 2 more are heard in its center. Russian President Vladimir Putin says Ukraine planned the Crimea Bridge explosion, calls it an act of terrorism. And the United States says it will continue offering security assistance to Ukraine. We'll begin with news out of Russian state media, which indicated that a large fire has erupted over the rail bridge between Crimea Peninsula and Russia in the early hours of Saturday. That's talking about over the weekend stories. According to it, the blast was caused by a lorry explosion and led to oil tankers on the rail section catching fire, with the road then collapsing. Ukraine's media, on the other hand, reported that the blast took place on the bridge at around 6 a.m. Footage appeared to show a train on the Kerch Strait rail bridge blaze, with the adjacent road bridge also appearing to have sustained some damage. The Speaker of Russia's lower house of parliament called it an act of war, as the country's investigative committee said it had initiated a criminal case in connection with the incident on the bridge. An advisor to Ukraine's President Mikhailo Podolyak called the damage to the bridge, quote, a beginning, but did not directly claim Ukrainian responsibility. Crimea was annexed in 2014 by Moscow, which now uses the bridge to move military equipment into Ukraine. In the meantime, satellite images released show extensive damage to the bridge in Crimea following that explosion. Fire and smoke could be seen coming from a tanker train on the bridge's railway line, while a substantial part of Bridge Road lay destroyed and partially underwater. Saturday's early morning explosion on the bridge, for which Russia did not immediately assign blame, prompted gleeful messages from Ukrainian officials, but no claim of responsibility. But Russian President Vladimir Putin says that the explosion on that bridge was a terrorist act planned by Ukrainian special services. Mr. Putin was meeting with Alexander Bastrikian, the head of Russia's investigative committee, who was presenting findings of an inquiry into Saturday's explosion and fire on the bridge.
There is no doubt that this is an act of terrorism aimed at destroying Russia's critically important civilian infrastructure. And this was devised, carried out, and ordered by the Ukrainian special services.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made an apparent reference to the Kerch Bridge explosion, describing Crimea as cloudy but warm. He added that Ukrainians are looking towards a sunnier future without invaders, particularly in Crimea. Mr. Zelensky also said in the video statement that fierce fighting continues in Ukraine's east and south, but the troops were holding positions in Donbass, particularly in the Bakhmut direction.
Today was a good and mostly sunny day in our country. Over most of the territory, it was about 20 degrees Celsius and sunny. Unfortunately, it was cloudy in Crimea, although it was still warm. But however the clouds are, Ukrainians know what to do, and they know that our future is sunny. This is the future without invaders on all our territory, in particular in Crimea. During the current day, the movement of our military, the Security Service of Ukraine, the National Guard, and all those involved in actions in the east and south of our country has continued. We hold our position in the Donbass, particularly in the Bakhmut direction, where it is extremely difficult now, very fierce fighting.
Huge queues of cars lined up waiting to cross the damaged Crimea Bridge as motorists tried to leave the annexed peninsula. A flagship project for Russian President Vladimir Putin, built at a reported cost of $3.6 billion. The bridge was damaged, as we've been reporting, in a powerful blast on Saturday. The blast, which officials said killed 3 people, hit a crucial supply route for Russian forces in Ukraine. Thousands of motorists were stranded in queues. Another motorist estimated the queue was about 15 kilometers long and would take up to 10 hours to pass. And several explosions rocked the Ukrainian capital Kyiv this morning after Russia accused Ukraine of orchestrating a powerful blast that damaged Crimea Bridge linking Russia and Crimea. The first two explosions were heard between 8:15 and 8:20, and according to local media, two more explosions were heard in central Kyiv at around 9:30. A children's playground was among the sites hit by the rocket or missile attack on the Ukrainian capital. The mayor of Kyiv urged the city's residents to remain in shelters following a suspected attack on the capital. We're also learning that explosions have been heard in the western Ukrainian city of Lviv. Meanwhile, at least 12 people have been killed and 49 others hospitalized, including 6 children as a result of missile strikes in Ukraine's southeastern city of Zaporizhia. That's according to its governor, Alexander Staruk. A 9-story building was partially destroyed overnight, 5 other residential buildings leveled, and many more damaged in 12 Russian missile attacks. Emergency service workers were seen carrying bodies out of a devastated apartment block. Earlier, city officials, Anatoly Kotev, said at least 17 people were killed when missiles hit a high-rise apartment complex and building. The city is about 52 kilometers from a Russian-held nuclear power plant that is Europe's largest. A Ukrainian Marine brigade in Ukrainian-held Donetsk region used a lull in the fighting to repair one of its tanks a week after the key eastern town of Liman was retaken from Russian forces. The commander of the 503 Separate Marines Battalion, a 30-year-old with the nom de guerre of Kamil, Ukrainian for Hup, says he was happy about his country's recent successes in Kyiv and Kherson, but that his unit was aware of the price advancing Ukrainian troops had paid. 37-year-old serviceman Mikita said his unit would only move onwards in one direction to the east while loading a machine gun belt with cartridges. Ukrainian troops retook the town of Liman in the northern part of Donetsk region last week and reportedly continued an advance into the bordering Luhansk region. Turning away from Russian energy will lead to very deplorable consequences for the European Union, with up to 20 years of deindustrialization ahead. That's according to Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov. During an interview, Mr. Peskov claims that the Americans are now making crazy money by selling gas to European states at exorbitant prices. He adds that, and Europeans pay them, thereby depriving the economy of competitiveness. Production is collapsing, deindustrialization is coming. All this will have very, very deplorable consequences for the European continent over probably at least the next 10 to 20 years. Let's talk now to Olabode Shomi, Vice Chairman, Gas to Power Study Group of the Nigerian Gas Association, joins us from our Abuja studios. Good morning to you, Mr. Shomi. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
The Russians are, as you've just heard, claiming that what is going on in Europe with reference to gas supplies is going to be detrimental to Europe's economy. But then the supply from Russia to Europe has been halted both by sanctions and by damage to Nord Stream 1 and 2. So exactly what is it that is going on here?
I think one of the things that this has shown in terms of the claim by Putin is that probably there were more gas being supplied to Europe, through Nord Stream, than that is actually known. But that said, the issues are clear. The first is that there is limited availability of gas, which is going to be significantly impactful for the winter. And across Europe, it remains to be seen how that will go. There are many cases of people saying that people are going to choose between warming their homes and then warming their body. That's between food to eat and heating. We hope it doesn't get to that. But if it does get to that, the issue is that a lot of things that Europe has used traditionally for energy has been closed, one of which is coal. We are likely to see a complete reversal of the clean energy trusts of the European Union coming to coal, which, as we know, is even dirtier and more impactful to the environment than gas or even oil. So it's a dire situation, and it calls for practical steps. And it remains to be seen what practical steps the EU will take. But the options on the table includes the repair of the Nord Stream. Options on the table includes our own Trans-Saharan Nigerian gas pipeline as well as the Nigerian-Morocco gas pipeline. Those are also options on the table. So it remains to be seen how the EU will tackle this situation at this time.
There is, of course, the argument, as that is going on, there's the argument of, okay, we're not buying any more Russian gas, and if we're going to cap the prices. But there are those who are saying, look, we can't afford to cap the prices, and Russia has made it clear that anybody who caps prices will get no gas. And there are no, as you pointed out, no immediate alternatives that can immediately step in and fill the breach. That's on one hand. On the other hand, this is happening just at the same time as OPEC Plus, which also includes Russia, has taken a very drastic cut to its production capacity. Already many countries were not meeting up to their production quotas, but now there's an even deeper cut to those production quotas. So first, on the angle of capping the prices, what do you make of what's happening, and how do you think that can work? And then before we now come to what OPEC itself has done, OPEC Plus, that is, has done.
I think the talk about capping the prices by some aspect of the EU is just political posturing. I mean, we are not in a position to determine prices like that. It is the person who has his goods who largely can determine the prices in which he will sell it. It is a different case if there is a surplus of those goods in the environment, which is not the case with oil and gas at the moment. So the idea that they cap the price is just basically political posturing from where I stand, from how I see it. So some people have insisted that they will not pay in rubles, and Russia has stopped gas to them. So, but that was when they were in summer. Now they are approaching winter. It remains to see how it will be done. But unfortunately for everyone, really, it's the fact that the pipelines have been blown. And if there's any winner, the only person that benefits from this is the U.S. So invariably, everybody will have to look more to the U.S. for LNG, which is the liquefied gas, which is the only way you can transport gas across the oceans. Yes, the LNG is also possible from Russia, but really there's the issue about being politically right as a result of the war situation, that people will be reluctant to buy from Russia the liquefied gas, especially when there's an option from the US. So it's really and truly a complicated situation, and it will be a genuine test of the solidarity of the EU, and it will be good to see how everything plays out.
On the other hand, I did talk about OPEC and what OPEC itself has done, which has also tightened the supply market on the other side. What do you make of that?
Well, OPEC is an organization that cares for its members, or at least the interest of OPEC is to the members. So what they basically have done is to take advantage of the situation and tighten the noose around member countries for which the EU invariably is a victim. It should be understood that really it's a war situation, and both during the First World War and during the Second World War, oil was very instrumental into the winners of the war. I mean, it was tanks that broke the barriers during the Second World War, and those tanks, armored tanks as we know it today, were powered by gasoline. They were powered by petrol. It was those who had mobility to fly in the air, the planes, and to get tanks across regions that actually won the Second World War. And all those things were powered by petrol. And what we are seeing now is a war situation there. And we have OPEC, obviously, maybe not directly, maybe not factually, but whether by subtle means, are positioning more towards the direction of one of their members, who in this case is Russia. So basically, they are supporting Russia in a war. And that is what has happened. So basically, they've started the news with the hope that that will either force regime change in those countries, because those things are possible once people start to riot, or it will get them to back down and support and come to the negotiation table with Russia. There's midterm elections in November in the US. And believe me, this is also going to affect the elections. So at the end of the day, it is a war situation. OPEC is they're playing their own cards and ensuring that they get some action moving for them. So what I see this ultimately doing is affecting the midterm elections of the US in November. It will also provoke some amount of protests within the EU as people go into winter. That is the strength of what I see that OPEC has done.
You've also pointed out, because you said one of the options of what is available is for them to try to repair Nord Stream 1 and 2. But it does appear as if that is nowhere near on the cards. First of all, the countries along the Baltic Sea where Nord Stream 1 and 2 and where these leaks are supposed to be have indicated that they are not prepared to allow any activity in that area now. They are more concerned about securing the area against possible intrusion, particularly if this turns out to have been sabotage. So that means the repair, if it is going to take place, is not going to be soon. And as you pointed out, winter is here. But there are those who are also saying that, look, other countries around the world are also using this gas, and they have nothing as present to do with the war in Ukraine. They will continue to get their supplies because they are not under any kind of sanctions. Russia is not stopping its supply to them. Their traditional suppliers, including Nigeria, are not stopping supply. But because Europe is the biggest customer, it is certainly the richest customer, and now we have winter. How much do you think the energy crisis will actually force some kind of peace deal on the negotiating table in this war? As you pointed out, it's tanks that broke World War II. In this case, it might be the energy crisis that might force everybody to the table.
I mean, energy has always been important. I mean, I remember a gentleman within the US who used to say, energy is the most important commodity, period. So, I mean, this energy crisis is going to force people to the table. I mean, the parties know it, the EU know it, the US know it. The issue is at what terms, at what condition, and when. Everybody wants to go to the table from a position of strength. So it's basically posturing. And I think we should be looking at them coming to the tables maybe late December, maybe early in January, when a lot of the political activities will have evolved and eased. One of the things affecting it without a doubt is the midterm elections of the US. After the midterm elections happen, it will affect the amount of money that Congress can approve for the US government to give to Ukraine. It needs to be understood, when kept in perspective, that the amount that the US has given to Ukraine in terms of aid as at today is more than the total budget of defense for Russia. So there are people within the US who have complained that they actually expected more activities or more results from the war situation in the US. I mean, in Ukraine and Russia. But that's a totally different issue. But like we said, I mean, putting everything in perspective, these things will force or affect the results of the elections. It will also affect activities going into winter in the EU. And once that reaches a crescendo, so let's say January or January ending, we hope that all the principalities or for want of a better word, principalities involved in this situation can come to the negotiation table and the whole world can have more peace.
before I let you go, I must bring in Nigeria. The last time you and I spoke about this subject, and we talked about, you know, the possibilities of Nigeria stepping in to fill in some of these supply breaches, you pointed out that the infrastructure is simply not there, and that infrastructure cannot be bought and emplaced. It has to be built. It will take time. Between that time and now, I don't think any of that infrastructure has been built. You mentioned two things. There's the Trans-Saharan gas pipeline, there's the Trans-Moroccan one, which is the one, I think the latest one has just been signed between Nigeria and Morocco. But this takes time. This is not going to be ready in 6 months or in a year or in 2 years, possibly even in 3 years, because this traverses a whole lot of countries. So again, our LNG plant in Boni and the upcoming one in Finima cannot fill this supply gap, and Nigeria is the biggest producer on the continent, at least has the potential of being the biggest producer. So how does how do we fit into all of this?
Well, the truth be told, I mean, the nature of the industry is the nature of the industry. You can only do so much if you don't have the infrastructure. I mean, the US has more gas than Nigeria does, but it cannot meet the aid of Europe, primarily because they don't have a pipeline that connects the US to Europe, and may be impossible to do that, at least not in this generation. So as long as they don't have that, and Russia has gas, the EU will, by logic, common sense, and even the forces of business, look towards Russia for their gas demands. So it is the same thing, except we have the infrastructure, which is the pipeline that will move to Europe. We can have all the gas in the world, but it will not make too much sense. So the important thing is that, yes, we wish it had happened yesterday, and we wished it could have happened today, but it is always better to start it rather than looking for magic. So the pressure now should be on those two pipeline projects, where the NNPC should be asked questions, the West African Gas Pipeline Network should be asked questions, the minister should also be asked questions, so that they have some kind of, there's some kind of fire to their feet that will get them to act faster. It is possible to do those pipelines within 2 years if we are lucky and everything falls within place. But even if we are going to be lucky, if everything is going to fall into place, it has to be because every single person who is a stakeholder, including the media, puts attention, puts energy into it, and ensures that the thing takes place. So I believe that that should be where we'll focus on. I mean, Nigeria, with the new revelations in terms of how magic is happening within our pipelines and theft is happening, is a place that needs a system overhaul and systems cleansing. But that's a different issue for another time. The issue really is that there should be more attention, a little bit of pressure that is put on those who are behind the project, to the extent that they actually do their work and get the project moving. That would be my own submission on that.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Mr. Olabode Shomi, Vice Chairman, Gas to Power Study Group, Nigerian Gas Association, for your perspective this morning. Of course, as the days and weeks go on, it promises to be interesting, so definitely we'll be back to you for more analysis on all of this. But for now, thank you so much, and do have a pleasant Monday ahead. It's a public holiday.
Thank you, and happy holidays from here as well.
Thank you. And still to come on the program, Russian President Vladimir Putin will hold an operational meeting of his Security Council today. Please stay on with us. Welcome back. Thanks for staying tuned. The Russian President Vladimir Putin will hold an operational meeting of his Security Council this morning, just 2 days after a massive explosion on a key strategic bridge linking Crimea and Russia. The meeting itself isn't out of the ordinary. Mr. Putin regularly holds operational meetings with the Security Council, usually on a weekly basis. And while the agenda has not been made public, the meeting comes at a strategic crossroads for the Kremlin, which was make a series of unenviable choices after its invasion of Ukraine had faltered following a month of military setbacks. India's Foreign Minister Subrahmanyam Jaishankar says the country does not want to say in advance how it will vote at the United Nations General Assembly on a likely draft resolution condemning Russia's proclaimed annexation of parts of Ukraine. He says the General Assembly is due to vote on the draft resolution on Tuesday or Wednesday. Russia has vetoed a UN Security Council resolution introduced by the United States and Albania last month, condemning the proclaimed annexation, with China, Gabon, India, and Brazil abstaining.
Matter of prudence and policy, we don't predict our votes in advance. Having said that, you also know that we have been very clearly against the conflict in Ukraine. We believe that this conflict does not serve the interests of anybody, neither the participants nor indeed of the international community. As a country of the global south, we have been seeing firsthand how much it has impacted low-income countries, the challenges that they are facing in terms of fuel and food and fertilizers. You know, my Prime Minister said a few weeks ago at Samarkand that this is not an era of war. And, you know, a conflict today in some corner of the world can have a very profound impact on everybody across the world. And I think that continues to guide our thinking.
The White House has said it will continue to arm Ukraine, but declined direct comment on an explosion that damaged the bridge to Crimea. John Kirby, the National Security Council's Strategic Communications Coordinator, says both sides need to find a way to negotiate an end to the war, but that Russian President Vladimir Putin had shown no interest in doing so. According to Mr. Kirby, it's why, quite frankly, we're in touch almost daily with the Ukrainians, and we're going to continue to provide them security assistance.
It was reflecting the very high stakes that are in play right now, Martha, when you have modern nuclear power and the leader of that modern nuclear power willing to use irresponsible rhetoric the way that Mr. Putin has several times in just the last week or two. We are monitoring this as best we can. And we have been monitoring his nuclear capabilities, frankly, since he invaded Ukraine again back in February. So we're monitoring this very, very closely. And what I can tell you is that through all that process, we just simply haven't seen an indication that Mr. Putin has either made a decision to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine or has done anything to get closer to that decision-making process. So we're watching it as best we can, Martha. And again, the best thing I can tell you is that we haven't done anything to change our own strategic nuclear posture. And that's really about as far as we can go. We're watching this very, very closely. The president was talking about finding a way to end this war, which we all want to do. We all want to see this war end. It's gone on way too long. And what needs to happen is for the two sides to be able to sit down and negotiate and find a way out of this peacefully and diplomatically. Now, Mr. Putin has shown no indication, zero, none, that he's willing to do that. In fact, quite the contrary, by calling up hundreds of thousands of reservists, by politically annexing, or at least trying to annex, 4 areas of Ukraine, he's shown every indication that he's doubling down, that he wants to continue to prosecute this war, which is why, quite frankly, we're in touch almost daily with the Ukrainians, and we're going to continue to provide them security assistance. You just saw the president approve another more than $600 million just a few days ago of additional HIMARS and howitzers and other ammunition and some vehicles, tactical vehicles. You're going to see us continue to do that going forward.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has announced a military draft to send hundreds of thousands of conscripts to fight in Ukraine. Some people are, however, feeling the impact of this. For Vadim, he says he plunged into depression last month after the announcement of the partial military mobilization. The 28-year-old engineer says he was silent, explaining that he simply stopped talking while at work, adding that he was angry and afraid. When Russia's invasion of Ukraine began in February, Vadim says he took to the streets of Moscow to protest. But Mr. Putin's September 21 order to draft at least 300,000 men to fight felt like a point of no return. He decided he had only one option left. Several days after that order, he bid his grandmother a tearful farewell and left his home in Moscow potentially forever. In another development, North Korea has fired 2 short-range ballistic missiles from the Muncheon area of Gangwon province to the waters off the peninsula's eastern coast. That's according to South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff. According to Japan's State Minister of Defense, Toshiro Ino, the missiles were launched between 1:47 and 1:53 a.m. local time. Mr. Ino added that both missiles fell outside Japan's exclusive economic zone. The first missile is estimated to have flown about 350 kilometers or 217 miles at a maximum altitude of approximately 100 kilometers. That's according to him. The second traveled about the same distance. Mr. Ino noted that there were no reports of damages to vessels at sea, but the Defense Ministry was still analyzing the details and investigating what kind of missiles were launched, including the possibility that they were submarine-launched ballistic missiles. Meanwhile, the United States is imposing new sanctions following the spate of North Korean ballistic missile tests. That's according to an announcement by the U.S. Treasury and State Departments. The sanctions target 2 people and 3 entities connected to the delivery of refined petroleum to the DPRK, as North Korea is known, an action which directly supports the development of DPRK weapons programs and its military, according to Secretary of State Antony Blinken. The sanctions include 2 Singapore-registered companies and an entity registered in the Marshall Islands for the ship-to-ship transfers to circumvent UN sanctions, according to the Treasury Department. North Korea has fired 6 missiles in the past 2 weeks, an uptick, even in a year that has seen the highest number of launches since leader Kim Jong-un took power in 2011. All right, now let's talk to Laddie Williams of our business desk. All this must have implications, particularly the energy that we were discussing earlier with Olabode Shomi. So, Laddie, morning.
Good morning.
And happy holiday.
Happy holidays.
Let's look at this. One of the other countries that is involved in this, of course, is Iran. When we talk about energy and OPEC+, Iran is a key member. But its exports to Russia have grown during this period in spite of the sanctions.
Exactly. Talk about allies in sanctions. Now, you know, Iran used to be the most sanctioned country in the world, but I guess Russia is
now, Russia has taken over that,
exactly.
that title.
It makes sense for, you know, both countries to actually look at, you know, strengthening bilateral ties, and they've been doing that for a while now. And we've seen the result, about 70% increase, you know, with their trade, between
You are talking
countries.
of January to June this year,
Exactly, for the first half of this year, which is actually showing that they are, you know, actively trading. And one interesting part is Russia is also a major import hub for Iran. So they're scratching each other's back, you know, at this time. And obviously we've seen how the sanctions have impacted Russia. Almost everything has been hammered, you know, with Russia. So they're not able to get most of the things, the imports they get from around the world. So they've had to rely on Iran for things like edible fruits, nuts, dairy products. All of that they get from Iran. And Iran also gets quite a lot of imports from Russia too. So at the end of the day, it is happening at a strong, is getting stronger now, talking about that bilateral trade, and it's going to get stronger, even though there are risks, you know, because at the end of the day, we know the U.S. and its allies are still talking about, they're mulling secondary sanctions. So
indeed.
There is that risk of, you know,
of course, I'm sure the Iranians and the Russians could ask, what more could you possibly sanction?
What more? You've taken everything from us. So at the end of the day, they'll keep, you know, trading and keep strengthening their ties and looking for other countries, other friendly nations they can actually trade with.
Now, in the case of Ukraine itself, which is the theater of this war, Ukraine has been devastated, not just in terms of infrastructure and deaths from the war, but economically, Ukraine has also had problems. A bit of relief came with the grain deal, which is still going on, but there are now doubts as to whether or not it will continue after this 120 days. So it's negotiated with the IMF, and it's gotten $1.3 billion.
Yes, quite much needed assistance, you know, for this country, because it's not easy. You're at war, and you can't make income at this time, or if you're making any income, it won't be as much as you would if you were not at war. So at the end of the day, we've seen the IMF and, other governments, try and ramp up enough support, for Ukraine at this time, because at the end of the day, Russia is getting the sanctions, Ukraine gets the support, but still there is a risk because these debts will have to be paid back. And for the IMF, there's a debt sustainability clause. If you don't look like you're going to be able to pay back your debt, it will be hard for them to actually give you loans. But now they found a way around that, to see how they can support Ukraine, even though it is risky. The country is at war. There's a possibility they're not going to be able to pay back these loans. So they've been able to rally up other governments to see how they can make sure that they can actually service their existing debt and still remain sustainable. That's talking about Ukraine. So they're making this 1.3 billion available. It's going to help with food support and also to help the economy at this time because they're not able to trade at the level that they're used to. So there really is a battered economy. It's expected. You're at war. So now they're getting all the support they can. Remember a few months ago, they did sell some of those NFTs that were donated to them. So all of this is helping, cushion the impact of this war in Ukraine. And at the end of the day, they're still going to have to pay back. So hopefully, though they don't get too battered, they can actually stand on their feet at some point and actually, service these loans. But the countries are still going to, try to support them, going forward.
Now, one would expect that a company like Saudi Aramco would be really belching from all the profits that would come out of this energy crisis. I mean, Saudi Aramco, in case our viewers don't know, is wholly owned by the Saudi Arabian government. Yep. It's the biggest petroleum company in the world. I think by some estimates, it makes more money than the other majors put together. Yeah. Now, Saudi Aramco is maintaining full oil supplies to Asia in November, despite the cuts. Yes. How is that happening?
It's quite, it's come as a huge shocker at this point, and Saudi Aramco have not made any statements yet, but right now they're carrying on with the output supply for some of these Asian countries, and this is despite the fact that OPEC just cut, supplies by 2 million barrels last week. And at the end of the day, Saudi Aramco is saying, you know what, we're still going to keep to our commitment of, supplying those Asian countries. We're going to keep to our output. The market is gonna get quite volatile, with this information, because at the end of the day, we see the U.S. trying to ramp up more supply, into the market. But with that cut, the U.S. wasn't finding that funny. But now Saudi Arabia has come out to say that Saudi Aramco, that is, are going to continue, with their output to these Asian countries. So that is going to be some kind of relief for the U.S. They would like that information.
Yeah, because that would presuppose that the markets aren't quite as tight.
So at the end of the day, we're still watching, to see how far, this goes. But from all indications, they are going to keep up with that output that they had previously to these Asian countries. We're gonna see volatility. This should actually bring the prices down, talking about the oil market, because once oil is coming in there, good supply, we'll see the prices are gonna come down. But with that cut, we saw what the cut did. Yeah. We saw the prices Brent
went the other direction. Yeah.
Went all the way up. So it remains to be seen, what Saudi Aramco have to say about this. We'll be watching out for that statement for sure.
For during the course of today. Thanks, Ladi, for that. Of course, Ladi and the crew will be on Business Morning right after this, and Business Incorporated later on the day. Thanks.
Thank you.
We'll take a break, and when we come back, of course, we'll have more on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Kira Rudik is a Ukrainian member of parliament, as well as a lead member of the vice president, in fact, of the European Public and Political Organization, the European Transnational Political Party Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe. She joins us from Warsaw in Poland. Good morning to you. Kira, nice to speak to you.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Let's look at the very latest developments here that we've been talking about. It looks like it's going to be a busy week, both on the war front and on the diplomatic front. But you have been visiting Africa recently. What's been that like?
Well, it was my first visit of Africa, and the main goal was to talk to the leaders of liberal parties and to talk to the leaders of different African countries, explain to them what is going on in Ukraine, and answer the questions that they may have. Because I came to talk about the atrocities of the war, and I came to tell the truth and to persuade African leaders to support us in the United Nations General Assembly and elsewhere. I think it is critical to understand that right now the war that is happening in Ukraine that was started by Russia, it is not the war solely for European continent. It is the war that have the victims 1,000 miles away, and African citizens, African people are the victims of this war. 50% of Ukraine grain exports were going to African countries. And right now, when the grain exports are blocked, African citizens are the ones who are suffering the most of that. So Russia does not care about people dying of hunger and still blocking the ports so that the grains are rotten in Ukrainian silos. And even the recent grain deal that was happening did not allow us to export the grain in the amounts as it was before. Second, and incredibly important point is that Putin is creating the precedent of one country that is bigger and stronger and has a better army, he can attack another country, take and annex the territories, and just claim it his. And this is an incredibly dangerous precedent that we know and we see that could be repeated in certain African countries where the leaders can be very much empowered by Putin's actions and say, okay, we'll go and do the same. That will destabilize the situation in the region tremendously. This is why I had almost a dozen of meetings with different representatives of the Liberal Party of African countries, and we were talking about how to strengthen the democratic alliances to make sure that that there is no disinformation, or at least disinformation is fought and objected, and that African countries are standing together with the world that is fighting the imperialism and colonialism. There is no place for colonialism in the modern world, and this is what we need to say loud and clear, and this is what we need to fight for. Because Putin, he is very clear. He says, I am rebuilding Russian empire. But we in Ukraine, we do not want to be a part of Russian empire. We are a sovereign country, and we are fighting for our freedom.
What was the reception you got like? Because, of course, on the African continent, the countries on the continent, many of them have long-standing ties with Russia. And some of them have long-standing ties with Ukraine as well. But on the whole, it does appear as if the continent is divided between supporters of Ukraine and supporters of Russia, and those who are not choosing sides, who have remained neutral, particularly in the country that you went to, South Africa. South Africa has long-standing relations with Russia, and it does have some relations with Ukraine, but it says it's not taking sides. What was the kind of reception you got from those you met?
So the reception was indeed mixed. So as you said, there are countries that have a very strong position, and it's either supporting Ukraine or supporting Russia. But there are countries that say we will go with the UN's position, or that they say, okay, we don't want to get involved in this. And my main work is to make sure that the ones that say, okay, this is not our war, we are not involved, to explain to them how it affects themselves and their citizens, and that there is no way to not be involved. And the more situation progresses, the more important would be every single vote on UN General Assembly, but also a strong position on the rule of law, strong position on the democracy, strong position on, again, fighting the colonialism. Because even if countries do not care about the situation in Ukraine, they care about their neighbors that may be attacking, and they care about the influence of other pro-Russian countries. So I know one visit cannot make a huge difference for the things that should have been built for the 20, 30 years. But at least I was able to answer all the questions that different African politicians had. And I wanted to call for them to make the decision based on what the people think. Because, you know, in South Africa, whose official position is pretty neutral, in South Africa, I haven't seen a single person, starting from the cab driver up to the members of the high cabinet, who wouldn't say, we are with the nation of Ukraine. We are supporting Ukrainians in their fight for freedom because we know how it is to fight for freedom. So I would call for all the government to listen to what the people think, if they are truly representing them.
Indeed, we hope that you begin to have more and more success in this venture. Thank you very much, Kira Rudik, Vice President, Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe, for your time this morning. We hope that we'll be able to get to talk
and glory to Ukraine.
Very soon. Thank you so much. Let's take a look at some other news here. Former governor of New Mexico, Bill Richardson, says he is cautiously optimistic that 2 Americans wrongfully detained by Russia will be released, and suggested they could be freed by the end of the year. He recently traveled to Russia to discuss with Kremlin officials the possible release of basketball star Brittany Griner and former U.S. Marine Paul Whelan. And he said that he's working with the families of both Americans and coordinating with the White House for their release. Griner was sentenced in August to 9 years in a Russian jail after pleading guilty to drug smuggling. The 2-time U.S. Olympic basketball gold medalist had been arrested at Moscow airport and accused by Russian prosecutors of trying to smuggle less than 1 gram of cannabis oil in her luggage, which she said she had accidentally packed while in a hurry. Mr. Whelan was detained at the Moscow hotel in December of 2018 and arrested on espionage charges, which he has consistently and vehemently denied. He was convicted and sentenced in June 2020 to 16 years in prison in a trial U.S. officials denounced as unfair. The Ukraine national team coach Alexander Petrakov says the team will be targeting a victory over England next year to lift the spirits of the soldiers defending the country from Russian invaders. Ukraine missed out on World Cup qualification with defeat to Wales earlier this year and will face England and European champions Italy in qualification for Euro 2024. Mr. Petrakov's team have become a symbol of Ukrainian national pride, and he hopes that if the war is still raging next year, his players can provide encouragement to those fighting to defend and regain territory. The war has forced Ukraine to play their home Nations League matches this year in Poland, something Mr. Petrakov admits has been difficult for him and his players. Mr. Petrakov admitted taking on England at Wembley would be a tough task for his players, but added that Ukrainians never give up and will fight to the end, both on the front line and the football pitch as well. Meanwhile, England manager Gareth Southgate is looking forward to facing Ukraine in the Euros qualifier after being drawn in Group C alongside reigning champions Italy and North Macedonia and Malta. He believes football will be secondary when they face each other, since the teams are always thinking about the people of Ukraine. He praised the Ukrainian players for their continuous fighting spirit and also delivering good football in the midst of war.
I think everybody's seen what North Macedonia did in the qualification for the World Cup, and also Ukraine. We played them in Euros, and the scoreline looked comfortable, but it wasn't a comfortable game at all. They're some very good players, so I think it's a really tough group. Of course, all of us are thinking and sending our prayers and thoughts to people in Ukraine anyway. So the football is secondary to that. but I know that the games they've played with tremendous pride and a high level of performance, and I'm sure that will be the same for our matches.
Thanks for staying with us. That's our program this Monday morning. My name is Ladi Akeri Deloyle. It's been a pleasure having you with us. There's an update within the world today at 5 o'clock. Do watch out for that. But for now, do have yourselves a pleasant holiday ahead. Good morning.